How the Black Templars survived. 10. Certain years of war. Every other Space Marine chapter eventually stops fighting. The Black Templars never did. That image, endless ranks of black-armored zealots marching through frozen wastes, bolters raised, banners whipping in the wind, isn't propaganda. It's a 10,000-year-old reality that should be mathematically impossible. While other chapters rotate between battles and recovery, while even the mighty Ultramarines return to Macragge to rebuild, one brotherhood has maintained continuous offensive operations since the Horus Heresy ended. Not decades, not centuries, 10,000 years. Let that sink in for a moment. 10 millennia of unbroken warfare. 10 millennia of crusades launched, enemies slaughtered, and worlds burned clean of corruption. The Roman Empire lasted about 500 years at its peak. The Black Templars have been fighting longer than most human civilizations have existed combined, and they haven't taken a single day off. The Black Templars represent something that shouldn't exist within the Imperium's framework. A chapter that has been on permanent, uninterrupted crusade since the moment Rogel Dorn's Imperial Fists were forced to split apart. They don't have a homeworld. They don't take breaks. They don't stop. And somehow, against every statistical probability, against attrition rates that should have exterminated them dozens of times over, they haven't just survived. They've thrived. The Codex Astartes, that sacred document penned by Robert Guillemot after the Heresy, strictly limits chapters to 1,000 battle brothers. It's the law. It's gospel. Every chapter master in the galaxy knows that number, like they know their own gene seed lineage. The Black Templars? Conservative estimates place their numbers between 5,000 and 6,000. Some whisper the true count exceeds 10,000 warriors, an entire legion operating in plain sight, hidden not through secrecy, but through clever distribution across hundreds of simultaneous crusade fleets scattered throughout the galaxy. This raises uncomfortable questions that the Inquisition has repeatedly failed to answer. How does a chapter with no recruiting world maintain such numbers? How do they replace losses sustained in constant warfare when other chapters struggle to maintain even their 1,000 Marine limit? How have they avoided the political purges that destroyed or crippled other chapters deemed too powerful, too independent, too dangerous to the Imperium's internal stability? The answer lies not in luck, not in simple martial prowess, though they possess that in abundance. The answer lies in a deliberate, fanatical, and brilliantly ruthless organizational philosophy that their founder, High Marshal Sigismund, encoded into their very existence. Sigismund, the greatest swordsman the Imperium ever produced. The Emperor's champion before that title even existed. A warrior who stood at the walls of Terra during humanity's darkest hour and killed so many traitors that his yellow armor turned permanently black with their blood. He didn't just create another Space Marine chapter when the legions were broken apart. He engineered a self-perpetuating war machine specifically designed to outlast everything, including the Imperium's own bureaucracy. Their blood-soaked path stretches from the ashes of the Horus Heresy to the present dark millennium. Not just their famous battles, and there are many, but the specific mechanisms, doctrines, and acts of cunning defiance that allowed a chapter of genocidal zealots to survive 10,000 years of internal and external threats. The Black Templars don't merely represent grim-dark fanaticism at its most extreme. They represent survival at its most ruthless. That frozen tundra from the opening scene? That's Armageddon, where High Marshal Helbrecht led the largest Black Templar deployment in millennia. But that battle against Ghazkul's Wa'agor was merely one crusade among hundreds occurring simultaneously across the galaxy. Understanding how they reached that point requires going back to the very beginning. to a moment when one warrior looked upon a crumbling Imperium and decided that eternal war was the only acceptable answer. To understand the Black Templars, you have to understand the very specific kind of trauma that broke their founder. Because Sigismund wasn't simply a loyalist warrior. He was a man utterly shattered by betrayal, and then rebuilt into something harder, colder, and infinitely more dangerous. Before the Horus Heresy, Sigismund was the gold standard. As first captain of the Imperial Fists, he was Rogel Dorn's most trusted sword arm, his martial pride made manifest. He was universally considered the finest duelist in all the legions, a distinction that carried real weight when your peers included demigods and beings who could level cities. Warriors from across the Imperium traveled simply to witness him fight in the practice cages. Even Horus Lupercal, the War Master himself, openly acknowledged Sigismund's supremacy with a blade. He was the paragon, the apex predator in an era of apex predators. But Sigismund harbored a secret that would cost him everything. Before the traitor legions ever revealed themselves, he received a prophetic warning from the Imperial Fists librarians, psychers whose very existence his primarch, Rogel Dorn, barely tolerated. They showed him visions of fire and treachery, of Horus's betrayal, of the coming civil war that would tear the galaxy apart. And Sigismund, in a move that would define his future, chose to believe them. When the Imperial Fists were ordered to deploy to the Istvan system, where they would have been ambushed and slaughtered alongside other loyal forces, Sigismund subtly manipulated fleet orders and troop movements to ensure that he and his company remained at Terra. He was right. Every terrible detail of the vision was true. Horus did betray the Emperor. The trap at Istvan the Turk did spring. But when Rogel Dorn discovered how Sigismund knew that his first captain had placed his trust in the whispers of psychers over his primarch's own judgment, the sense of betrayal cut deeper than any blade. Dorn stripped Sigismund of his rank. He cast down his most celebrated son, not because Sigismund was wrong, but because he had kept secrets, because he had trusted the witch over his father. That rejection transformed Sigismund at a fundamental level. He had saved thousands of lives through his actions, had been proven catastrophically correct, and was punished for it anyway. The lesson burned itself into his soul with the heat of a plasma coil. Trust is a fool's game. Trust nothing and no one except the cold steel of the blade and the silent judgment of the Emperor. No more visions, no more prophecies, no more psychers. Only absolute faith, demonstrated through absolute violence. During the siege of Terra, this new Sigismund was unleashed. He became something terrifying. A one-man execution force who stood at the walls of the Imperial Palace and challenged the champions of chaos to single combat. Day after day, night after night, he killed traitor lords, demon princes, and corrupted space marines. The blood of the fallen covered his brilliant yellow armor so thoroughly that it appeared black. Some say he never bothered to clean it. The black became his new identity. When the Emperor fell and the Imperium began fracturing into 1,000 grieving pieces, Rogel Dorn attempted a reconciliation with his estranged son. It came too late. The warmth between them had died on the star charts, bound for Istvan. Sigismund accepted the role Dorn offered, founder of a new chapter, but it was a cold transaction. The Imperial Fists would remain Dorn's sons, the stoic builders and defenders. Sigismund would take the others. He would take the zealots, the fanatics, the warriors, who, like him, believed the only appropriate response to galactic betrayal was eternal, unending retribution. He called them the Black Templars, honoring both their darkened armor and their sacred violent duty. And from that moment, Sigismund began encoding specific, fanatical principles, designed to ensure his chapter would never face the vulnerabilities that had nearly destroyed the Imperium. No psychers ever. No fixed homeworld to become a target. No numerical limits to hamstring their holy war. Sigismund looked upon a galaxy teeming with enemies and decided that 10,000 years of continuous warfare was the minimum acceptable response. The Second Founding, that great and terrible reorganization when the shattered legions were divided into 1,000 Marine chapters, should have been the end of the Black Templars before they even began. It was a rule born from the ashes of Horus's ambition. Robut. Guilliman's Codex. Astartes served a brutally practical purpose. Never again could a single commander control enough space marines to threaten the Imperium itself. The Heresy proved that the concentrated power of a legion was an existential liability. By limiting chapters to 1,000 battle brothers, no future rebel could ever muster the forces for a galactic civil war. Every other chapter accepted these limitations. The Ultramarines, the Imperial Fists, the Blood Angels, they all bowed to the new order. The Black Templars, however, found a loophole large enough to drive an entire crusade fleet through. Publicly, they accepted Guilliman's reasoning. Practically, they subverted it completely. Sigismund's solution was elegant in its brutal simplicity. If a chapter cannot exceed 1,000 Marines in one place, then you simply ensure no one can ever count how many Black Templars exist in total. From their very inception, the Black Templars maintained no homeworld, no central fortress monastery, no single location where their numbers could be audited and verified by the administratum. Instead, they were a ghost in the machine, a legion scattered across dozens and later hundreds of independent crusade fleets, each prosecuting its own war in a different segment of the galaxy. When Imperial census takers arrived to verify compliance with the Codex, they would find a single battle barge or strike cruiser home to a few hundred Marines. The rest, the Marshal would explain, with a dead-eyed stare, that they were crusading somewhere else. Always somewhere else. This wasn't just a clever bit of bureaucratic manipulation. Sigismund hammered it into the bedrock of their faith. It became a religious doctrine. A true crusader, he preached, must be crusading. To remain stationary was a sign of spiritual weakness, a failing of faith. The chapter's eternal war footing wasn't just a military strategy, it was a sacred obligation. Any Black Templar who argued for establishing a permanent base wasn't just questioning tactics, he was arguing against the Emperor's divine will. The administrative genius of this structure became devastatingly apparent within centuries. Each crusade fleet operated as a semi-autonomous unit, recruiting from whatever worlds they conquered or defended. When one fleet sustained catastrophic casualties against an orc, in the galactic east, other fleets fighting Necrons in the west were completely unaffected. When the Imperium collapsed into the civil strife of the Age of Apostasy, or when massive warp storms isolated entire sectors for centuries, individual Black Templar crusade fleets continued their wars, operating independently. The chapter couldn't be decapitated, because it had no single head to cut off. High Marshals, the chapter's supreme commanders, rotated between fleets. But real authority rested with the Marshals commanding each crusade. If a High Marshal fell, the remaining Marshals simply elected another from their ranks. If entire crusade fleets were annihilated, others continued the eternal war. The chapter became an organizational hydra, regenerating its losses through distributed recruitment faster than any centralized foe could possibly inflict them. Perhaps most crucially, this structure made the Black Templars incredibly useful to Imperial authorities, in ways that invited protection rather than scrutiny. When a sector faced an overwhelming Tyranid invasion, Black Templar crusade fleets could respond from multiple directions simultaneously. Their galaxy-spanning distribution meant they maintained active knowledge of threats, enemy movements, and defensive needs across vast regions where other chapters were simply absent. The High Lords of Terra aren't stupid. They knew, and they know, that the Black Templars' numbers far exceed the Codex limits. But every time a reformist inquisitor raised concerns, convenient factors intervened. The Black Templars had just saved a crucial Forge world, earning the eternal gratitude of the Adeptus Mechanicus. They were, at that very moment, the only force holding back a tendril of Hive Fleet Leviathan. They had earned the sworn loyalty of 3 different chapter masters who would vehemently resist any action taken against them. Sigismund didn't just create a chapter that could survive endless warfare. He created one that the Imperium needed too badly to ever destroy. Most Space Marine chapters maintain librarians, psychers, who wield the raw power of the warp as a weapon against humanity's enemies. The Black Templars have never tolerated a single one in their ranks. This is not superstition. It is a survival strategy, forged in the fires of betrayal and hammered into doctrinal steel by a man who watched psychic power tear the Imperium apart. Sigismund's trauma, his fall from grace as the Imperial Fists' first captain, permanently poisoned his view of psychers. Yes, the librarians who warned him of Horus's betrayal had been right, but their correctness had cost him everything: his command, his father's trust, his very sense of identity. More importantly, Sigismund had a frontline view of the Heresy's primary infection vector. He saw how chaos corrupted mortals almost exclusively through their psychic vulnerabilities. The word-bearers fell because their chaplains opened themselves to demonic whispers disguised as divine truth. Magnus the Red damned his entire legion, the Thousand Sons, through his unrestrained psychic arrogance. Every major catastrophe of the Civil War could be traced back to someone opening their mind to powers they could not possibly control. The Black Templar solution was therefore absolute and uncompromising. No psychers. Period. Any aspirant showing the slightest glimmer of psychic potential was immediately rejected, or, depending on the circumstances of their discovery, executed on the spot as a potential vessel for corruption. The chapter maintained no astropathic choirs of its own, a staggering logistical disadvantage. They relied entirely on the attached vessels of the Imperial Navy for long-range communication, willingly surrendering tactical flexibility in exchange for absolute spiritual incorruptibility. This doctrinal purity paid dividends across 10 millennia of war. When Black Templar crusades engaged the forces of chaos, their enemies found no psychic weak points to exploit. Demonic possession, a plague upon other Imperial forces, required either a willing host or a vulnerable psyker. The Black Templars provided neither. Sorcerous attacks that could shatter the minds of other Space Marines, filling their thoughts with madness and terror, would wash over Templar formations and simply fail. It was not because of any counter-magic, but because there was nothing for the magic to grab onto. Their minds were closed fortresses of hate and faith. This hatred of the witch extended to their battlefield tactics. Black Templar crusade fleets prioritized the elimination of enemy psychers with a ferocity that bordered on obsession. Chaos sorcerers, Eldar warlocks, orc weird boys, all were marked for immediate execution, often by the Emperor's champion personally, who would carve a bloody path through entire armies just to silence a single psyker. The Black Templars developed specialized anti-psyker combat doctrines that other chapters would eventually adopt, though none pursued them with the same religious, all-consuming fervor. Critics in the High Lords argued, correctly, that this limitation cost the Black Templars significant tactical options. Librarians provided battlefield intelligence, psychic offense, and defensive barriers that had saved countless Space Marine lives. The Black Templars compensated for this lack through sheer, unrelenting aggression, attacking so fast and so hard that enemies never had the time to properly employ their psychic advantages. But the doctrine's true. World-saving value emerged during periods of galactic warp instability, when the Great Rift tore the galaxy in half, unleashing the psychic maelstrom of the Cicatrix Maledictum. Chapters with strong librarious traditions suffered catastrophic breaches. Demons poured through the minds of their weakened psychers, corrupting battle brothers from within. Entire companies fell to mass possession. The Black Templars, they reported 0 internal corruption incidents. Their purity, forged through 10,000 years of absolute rejection, had become an impenetrable barrier against the horrors of the Imperium. The ecclesiarchy, the Imperium's state religion, took notice. The Black Templars' fanatical rejection of witchcraft aligned perfectly with the doctrines of the Imperial Creed. Where other chapters maintained an awkward, often strained relationship with the Church, the Black Templars became the favored sons of the faith. Cardinals blessed their crusades. Holy confessors served alongside their chaplains. The political protection this sacred alliance provided proved invaluable, time and time again, whenever uncomfortable questions about the chapter's true strength arose. Sigismund's paranoid hatred of psychers had, against all odds, transformed into a survival mechanism none of his contemporaries could have ever anticipated. Understanding Black Templar survival requires grasping how their crusade structure actually works, because it's not simply always attacking. It's a sophisticated galaxy-spanning system for ensuring that perpetual warfare generates perpetual recruitment, creating a self-sustaining cycle of violence and renewal that has outlasted empires. A typical Black Templar crusade operates with chilling efficiency. A marshal, a veteran commander of immense authority, receives authorization from the High Marshal to prosecute warfare against a designated enemy or within a specific region. He assembles his fighting strength from the Crusade fleet's resources, typically several hundred battle brothers, along with their supporting armies of neophytes, indentured serfs, and the vast naval assets of their mobile fortress monasteries. The crusade then deploys to its target area and begins a systematic, utterly merciless campaign of extermination. Crucially, these crusades do not end when the initial objectives are completed. A marshal is expected, even doctrinally required, to identify new threats in adjacent regions and extend his crusade accordingly. A war launched to shatter an Orc empire might seamlessly transition into a brutal anti-chaos operation when warp-tainted forces are discovered festering nearby. That, in turn, might pivot into a Xenos purge when meddlesome Eldar are detected interfering with Imperial interests. The crusade only ever ends for one of 3 reasons. The Marshal dies in battle, his losses become so catastrophic that they are fundamentally unsustainable, or the High Marshal himself redirects the fleet to an even more critical war zone. This perpetual motion warfare generates constant, unprecedented opportunities for recruitment. Every world the Black Templars defend or conquer contains a potential harvest of aspirants. Unlike chapters bound by the Codex to specific, often depleted recruiting worlds, the Black Templars cast their net across the entire galaxy. A promising warrior youth on a feral death world, whose only ambition was to become his tribe's chieftain, might find himself inducted into a crusade fleet passing through his system. A hive-ganger who impressed a marshal with his ferocity during a desperate planetary defense could be ripped from his life and transformed into a neophyte within days. The recruitment rate this enables is staggering, far exceeding that of almost any other chapter. Their gene seed, inherited from the famously stable lineage of Rogel Dorn and his Imperial Fists, suffers from none of the degradation or mutation issues that plague the descendants of other Primarchs. Aspirant survival rates during the brutal implantation and hypno-conditioning processes are remarkably, almost suspiciously, high. Neophytes in a Black Templar crusade occupy a unique and terrifying position. They fight alongside full battle brothers from their very first engagement, learning the art of war through immediate, violent immersion rather than segregated training programs in some distant fortress. Each neophyte is assigned to a specific initiate, a full battle brother who becomes his personal mentor and drill sergeant, responsible for his combat education. If the neophyte survives long enough to earn his black carapace, the final, most crucial Space Marine implant, he is elevated to the rank of initiate himself. His first duty? He receives his own neophyte to train, continuing the bloody cycle. This mentor-apprentice system is a crucible. It accelerates combat readiness at a terrifying rate. Where other chapters might spend decades training neophytes in the relative safety of a monastery, Black Templar neophytes either learn to fight effectively within months or they die. The brutal Darwinian pressure ensures that any who survive possess exceptional combat instincts, creating a continuous stream of veteran-quality warriors to replenish the chapter's ranks. It also provides profound organizational resilience. When a crusade fleet suffers catastrophic losses, and they do regularly, the survivors can rebuild by simply intensifying recruitment from newly conquered territories. A crusade reduced to just 50 battle brothers remains a viable war machine because those 50 hardened veterans can process hundreds of aspirants while continuing offensive operations. Within a few short years, the crusade fleet returns to full strength, ready to bring the Emperor's wrath to a new corner of the galaxy. This self-regenerating quality has frustrated every enemy who believed they had finally, decisively destroyed a Black Templar force. The Hydra simply grows a new head. Every Black Templar crusade fleet maintains a singular tradition that serves both as a spiritual anchor and a brutally practical instrument of war. The Emperor's champion, a warrior touched by divine visions who embodies the chapter's eternal fury against the enemies of mankind. Before major engagements, as the crusade fleet prepares for war, the Black Templar chaplains lead their brothers in solemn vigils of prayer and meditation. In the flickering candlelight of a ship's chapel, surrounded by the droning of litanies, they kneel in silence, purifying their souls for the slaughter to come. During these rituals, something extraordinary occasionally happens. A battle brother, lost in his devotion, will be seized by overwhelming visions. He sees not the indistinct chaos of the warp, but clear, precise images of the coming battle. He sees specific enemies that must be destroyed, monstrous champions that must fall, and critical threats that require immediate, personal elimination. The Black Templars believe, with the certainty of zealots, that these visions do not originate from the foul Imperium. They come from the Emperor himself, a direct line of communication guiding his most faithful servants toward their most vital targets. The brother experiencing these visions is immediately pulled from the ranks and brought before the marshal and the assembled chaplains. He is declared the Emperor's champion for the coming battle. He is stripped of his own armor and reclad in the armor of faith, a suit of ancient, master-crafted artificer plate maintained since the chapter's founding, each surface covered in devotional scripture and purity seals. Into his hands is placed the black sword, a relic blade of obsidian metal, its power field crackling with an energy capable of cleaving through a tank's hull or a demon's hide. His sole purpose, his entire existence, is now reduced to a single, sacred task: to seek out and destroy whatever enemy champion or war machine his holy vision revealed. Emperor's champions are not expected to survive their appointments. The visions drive them with a preternatural fervor toward the most dangerous enemies on any battlefield: towering greater demons, infamous chaos lords, orc warlords surrounded by their toughest knobs. They fight with a complete, ecstatic disregard for personal survival, trusting that the Emperor's will guides their every parry and strike. And when they inevitably fall, their deaths frequently coincide with the spectacular elimination of a threat that would have otherwise devastated the entire crusade. This institution serves multiple, critical survival functions. Tactically, it ensures the Black Templars always have a dedicated, unstoppable champion killer ready to decapitate enemy leadership. Throughout 10 millennia, Emperor's champions have personally slain hundreds of demon princes, chaos sorcerers, and Xenos leaders who would have otherwise led successful campaigns against Imperial forces. Spiritually, the champion is a living symbol of divine favor to every other battle brother in the crusade. The visions are proof that the Emperor watches, that he personally guides his Templars toward righteous victory. This absolute faith generates a furious fearlessness that other chapters can only achieve through decades of cold, psychological conditioning. Black Templars do not fear death because they believe, they know, that the Emperor himself is the silent commander of their crusade. Perhaps most importantly, the tradition of the Emperor's champion provides the Black Templars with a political legitimacy that pure military success could never achieve. The ecclesiarchy, the state church of the Imperium, is forever suspicious of Space Marine chapters who operate outside the Imperial creed. But they embrace the Black Templars, specifically because of the Emperor's champions. Here is living, breathing proof that the God Emperor communicates directly with his warriors. The chaplains who confirm a champion's visions work hand in hand with cardinals who verify holy miracles. The Black Templars are not merely tolerated by the Church, they are celebrated as exemplars of true, unwavering faith. This sacred alliance has protected the chapter from ruin time and again. When reformist factions within the High Lords of Terra questioned the Black Templars' flagrant disregard for codex numbers during the 35th millennium, it was the fanatical Cardinal Bucharest who intervened on their behalf. When the Inquisition's puritanical monodominant faction later demanded an investigation into the chapter's psychic visions, ecclesiarchy representatives successfully argued that the champions were sanctioned miracles, not a form of witchcraft. Sigismund, who personally witnessed the Emperor slay Horus, understood something that many imperial officials miss. The Emperor was a god, or so close to one that the distinction no longer mattered. By building his chapter's very identity around this direct, divine connection, Sigismund ensured the Black Templars would have powerful allies in the one institution destined to dominate imperial politics. 10,000 years later, every emperor's champion who dies in a blaze of glory reinforces that holy alliance. Surviving 10 millennia of warfare required more than just organizational genius. It required surviving specific, existential threats that destroyed other chapters entirely. The Black Templars faced several annihilation-level challenges throughout their history, and examining how they endured reveals the brutal effectiveness of their doctrines in the face of oblivion. The Beast Arises in M32 presented the first true test. An orc warlord of unprecedented power and cunning unified the greenskin race into a Wah, capable of threatening Terra itself. The Imperium reeled. Multiple Space Marine chapters, including some of Sigismund's own brethren from the Imperial Fists lineage, were effectively destroyed. Their fortress monasteries were reduced to radioactive craters, their gene seed stocks were lost forever, and their battle brothers were exterminated to the last man. The Black Templars? Their distributed structure meant no single defeat could eliminate them. When entire crusade fleets were swallowed by the green tide, other fleets, thousands of light years away, continued their own wars, completely unaware. While the Imperium mourned the loss of entire chapters, the Black Templars simply absorbed their own staggering casualties, redirected other crusades to the conflict, and emerged from the bloodiest war since the Heresy, with proportionally fewer permanent losses than any other major chapter involved. The age of apostasy in M36 threatened the chapter differently, through politics, not open warfare. When the mad High Lord Goge Vander seized control of the ecclesiarchy and the Imperium, he demanded all military forces swear oaths of loyalty to him personally. Most chapters complied, fearing the consequences of defying the master of the Imperium. The Black Templars High Marshal of that era received the demand, read it, and simply ignored it. While Vandir's attention was focused on solidifying his power on Terra, the Templar Crusade fleets were busy prosecuting wars against Xenos empires and chaos cults on the galactic fringe. They had real enemies to fight. By the time Vandir's tyrannical regime collapsed into civil war, the Black Templars had avoided both the shame of compliance and the peril of direct confrontation, emerging from the chaos with their honor and independence perfectly intact. The Gothic War against Abaddon's 12th Black Crusade tested the chapter's anti-chaos doctrines directly. As the despoilers' forces poured out of the Eye of Terror, they corrupted Imperial commanders and turned entire defense fleets against each other through insidious sorcery. Captains went mad, hearing whispers in the Vox, seeing demons on their bridge view screens. Black Templar Crusade fleets proved utterly immune to this manipulation. Their complete rejection of psychers provided no purchase for chaos influence. The sorcerous attacks that shattered other formations washed over the Templars like water on stone. It was during this war that Crusade Marshal Ormond famously led a suicidal counter-assault against Abaddon's flagship, the Vengeful Spirit. He and his sword brethren fell before reaching the War Master, but their fanatical charge delayed the chaos advance long enough for Imperial reinforcements to arrive, saving the sector. Yet the 13th Black Crusade and the fall of Cadia represented the most severe test of all. High Marshal Helbrecht committed the largest single Black Templar deployment in millennia to Cadia's defense, stripping Crusade fleets from across the galaxy. When the fortress world finally fell, when Abaddon achieved the victory he had sought for 10,000 years, the Black Templars suffered catastrophic losses. Entire Crusade fleets died in the fire and vacuum above the planet. For the first time in centuries, the chapter's total numbers dropped precipitously. But even this disaster demonstrated their ultimate survival mechanism. The crisis created unprecedented recruitment opportunities. Worlds facing annihilation from the Great Rift's demon incursions offered up their best warriors to any force that could save them. Black Templar chaplains, their own ranks thinned, found more willing aspirants than they could possibly process. The Crusade fleets that survived Cadia absorbed recruits from dozens of shattered systems, rebuilding their strength through the very crisis that had nearly destroyed them. The pattern was proven. Distributed structure absorbed losses, doctrinal purity prevented corruption, and perpetual war generated its own renewal. The wars for Armageddon represent the Black Templars' most visible triumphs and reveal, with chilling clarity, how the chapter leverages religious fervor into unstoppable military advantage. 3 separate planetary invasions by the Orc warlord Gazikul Thraka tested every aspect of Black Templar doctrine, and each time, the chapter emerged not just victorious, but stronger. The Second War for Armageddon in the 951st year of the 41st millennium saw Black Templar Crusade fleets respond alongside dozens of other Imperial forces. What distinguished them was the sheer speed of their deployment. While other chapters required weeks to mobilize from distant fortress monasteries, Black Templar fleets, already engaged in constant, grinding warfare, simply redirected their crusades. They smashed into the Orc vanguard first, They fought the longest, and their black-armored warriors became symbols of hope in the ash-choked hives. Their sacrifice earned the eternal gratitude of Armageddon's populace, a debt that would pay dividends for centuries. But it was the Third War for Armageddon that truly demonstrated the chapter's terrifying capability. Gazakul returned, now a force of nature, a green apocalypse of billions of orcs descending upon a woefully underdefended world. High Marshal Helbrecht assumed overall command of the Black Templar forces and initiated the largest single-chapter deployment since the Great Crusade itself. Crusade fleets from across the galaxy answered his call, their prows cutting through the warp toward a single desperate battlefield. What followed was a masterclass in religious warfare. Helbrecht understood that Armageddon's defense depended not just on killing orcs, but on maintaining the morale of a terrified population across years of apocalyptic siege. He transformed the campaign into a holy crusade. Working alongside the zealous Cardinal Yarth, every engagement was framed as sacred battle. In the smog-filled Manufactorum cathedrals, Black Templar chaplains stood before exhausted workers, their booming litanies of hatred for the Xenos echoing over the clang of machinery. For the first time, the people heard prayers more powerful than the roar of their forges. When an emperor's champion was declared, his duels against hulking orc warlords were broadcast across the planetary Vox network. A planet of billions watched, mesmerized, as a lone warrior in holy armor, wielding a single black blade, carved a path through monstrous beasts to slay their leader. Hope was no longer an abstract concept. It was a live feed of righteous slaughter. The population didn't simply endure, they began to believe they were participating in divine warfare. Conscript militias, their laser guns little more than flashlights against the green tide, charged orc positions, singing hymns of the Emperor's wrath. Factory workers, seeing their hab blocks overrun, sabotaged their own life-sustaining machinery with prayers on their lips, choosing death over allowing their industry to fall into alien hands. Helbrecht's personal leadership was the heart of this inferno. He led from the front, his command, Land Raider, the Sigismund's Wrath, a constant presence in the thickest fighting. When a subordinate Castellan suggested a more cautious, tactical withdrawal from a collapsing front, Helbrecht's response was broadcast across the command channel for all to hear. Caution, he declared, was cowardice hiding behind the mask of strategy. Faith was their only shield. This wasn't recklessness. Helbrecht survived the entire war. It was a brutal demonstration that Black Templar leaders shared every single risk they demanded of their warriors. The Third War for Armageddon never truly ended. Gazakul eventually departed, but millions of orcs remained entrenched in the ash wastes. The planet became a permanent war zone, and for the Black Templars, a permanent recruitment ground. Young Armageddon warriors who had grown up watching Vox casts of Templar heroes eagerly sought induction when the Crusade fleets called for aspirants. A perfect bloody symbiosis was born. The Black Templars bled to protect Armageddon, and in return, Armageddon bled to produce new Black Templars. The cycle of war fed itself, proving that for the Templars, perpetual conflict generates perpetual renewal. The galaxy has never been more dangerous than it is in the current Dark Millennium, and the Black Templars have never been more necessary. The opening of the Great Rift, the shocking return of a Primarch, and the violent escalation of every existential threat have created conditions that would utterly destroy lesser chapters. The Black Templars, however, are thriving. The Cicatrix Maledictum, a galaxy-spanning warp rift that tore the Imperium in two, shattered Imperial organization overnight. Chapters that relied on central command structures and fortress monasteries found themselves isolated, unable to coordinate their forces. Successor chapters, on one side of the rift, could no longer contact their progenitors on the other. For a time, the Imperium's military coherence simply ceased to exist. The Black Templars barely noticed. Their crusade fleets had always operated independently, their forces already distributed across both halves of the now divided galaxy. While other chapters struggled to maintain basic communication, Black Templar marshals simply continued prosecuting their individual holy wars. The decentralized, self-sufficient structure that Sigismund had engineered 10,000 years earlier proved perfectly, almost prophetically, adapted to a cataclysm he could never have imagined. But a new, more complicated challenge arose from the light of the Imperium Sanctus. Robert Guilliman returned. The resurrected Primarch brought with him new technologies, Primaris reinforcements, improved armor, and advanced weaponry. But he also brought renewed, scrupulous attention to Codex Astartes compliance. Suddenly, the Black Templars' flagrant numerical superiorities attracted fresh scrutiny from the one authority figure in the galaxy, who could not be ignored, outmaneuvered, or politically sidelined. The author of the sacred text had returned, and his gaze was falling upon them. High Marshal Helbrecht's response was a masterclass in political cunning. He accepted the Primaris reinforcements with zealous enthusiasm, immediately integrating the new battle brothers into crusade fleets across the galaxy. He publicly acclaimed Guilliman as humanity's greatest living defender, pledging his sword and the lives of all his warriors to the Primarch's indomitous crusade. Black Templar fleets fought alongside Guilliman's forces, bleeding and dying in the galaxy's darkest corners. What Helbrecht didn't do was consolidate his forces for an accurate census. He did not reduce his recruitment rates. He did not abandon the chapter's sacred distributed structure. He gave Guilliman everything he wanted: loyalty, warriors, victories. Everything except compliance with the one rule that would have neutered his chapter. And Guilliman, desperately needing every loyal, fanatically effective warrior he could find to hold back the tide of darkness, chose not to press the issue. The Imperium was burning, and the Black Templars were the most eager firemen he had. The current Eternal Crusade sees Black Templar forces engaged on more fronts than at any point in their history. In the Imperium Nihilus, the dark half of the galaxy, crusade fleets prosecute unending warfare, cut off from Terra's light, but continuing their sacred mission with grim resolve. In the Imperium Sanctus, other fleets defend the Emperor's realm from the escalating threats spilling from the Great Rift's periphery. Individual marshals' crusades combat Tyrannid hive fleets, Necron dynasties, and chaos incursions simultaneously. 1,000 different wars under a single black banner. Each crusade continues to generate recruitment opportunities that offset the losses from others. Each victory creates new worlds indebted to the chapter, expanding the network of systems where Templar chaplains can seek out the faithful and the strong. The self-perpetuating cycle of war and renewal continues, scaling ever upward to meet threats that would have been inconceivable a mere century ago. Helbrecht himself has become a figure of near-mythological status. His leadership at Armageddon, his survival of Cadia's fall, his campaigns at the right hand of a Primarch, each feat adds another layer to a reputation that now protects the chapter as surely as any fortress wall. 10,000 years of continuous warfare, thousands of crusades launched, millions of enemies slain, countless worlds defended, conquered, or purged of the unclean. The Black Templars have persisted through every catastrophe the galaxy has produced, and understanding why they survived reveals something profound about the universe itself. When High Marshal Sigismund lay dying from wounds sustained during the First Black Crusade, he killed his final Chaos Champion with his last breath. His final words were a curse addressed to Abaddon the Despoiler himself. "You will die as your weakling father died, soulless, honorless, weeping, eternally damned." The War Master has never forgotten the insult. 10,000 years later, he still hunts the chapter that Sigismund founded. And for 10,000 years, he has never succeeded in destroying them. The Black Templars' survival was not accidental. It emerged from deliberate design decisions that addressed the specific vulnerabilities exposed by the Horus heresy. A distributed structure prevented decapitation strikes that would annihilate a centralized chapter. An absolute anti-psyker doctrine eliminated the vectors of internal corruption that had toppled legions. The doctrine of perpetual crusading generated a continuous, galaxy-spanning stream of recruitment. And a fanatical religious fervor created powerful political alliances that protected the chapter from the very imperial bureaucracy it defied. Each element reinforced the others, creating an organizational system specifically evolved for eternal warfare. But the deeper truth is this: the Black Templars survived because the galaxy needs them to survive. The Imperium faces threats that require forces capable of continuous, unrelenting, and fanatical offensive warfare. The Black Templars provide this capability more effectively than any other chapter. Their excess numbers, rather than threatening the Imperium, are one of its greatest shields. Their uncompromising zealotry, rather than destabilizing imperial authority, reinforces faith in the Emperor during humanity's darkest hours. The Inquisitors who question Black Templar numbers understand this. The High Lords of Terra, who overlook obvious Codex violations, understand this. Even Robout Guilliman, the author of the very Codex the Black Templars technically violate, understands this. The Black Templars have survived because their destruction would weaken the Imperium far more than their existence threatens it. This represents Sigismund's true genius. He didn't merely create a chapter capable of fighting eternally. He created one the Imperium could not afford to destroy. The Black Templars' fanatical devotion to warfare serves imperial interests so effectively that no political authority can truly justify their elimination. They have survived 10,000 years, not despite the Imperium's bureaucracy, but by making themselves ruthlessly essential to it. The frozen battlefield on Armageddon, endless ranks of Black Templars advancing through snow and death, represents not just one crusade, but every crusade, endlessly repeating across 10 millennia. Different enemies, different marshals, different champions, but always the same relentless advance, the same zealous fury, the same grinding determination to prosecute the Emperor's war until the stars themselves burn out. Other chapters have noble histories. The Ultramarines build empires. The Dark Angels pursue ancient secrets. The Space Wolves defend their worlds with legendary fury. But none of them have maintained continuous offensive operations for 10,000 unbroken years. The Black Templars alone chose eternal war, and against all odds, made that choice work. When the galaxy finally ends, when the Tyranid hive fleets consume the last worlds, when chaos corruption drowns the final stars, when entropy claims everything humanity ever built, somewhere, somehow, a Black Templar crusade fleet will still be fighting. Not because they can win, not because survival remains possible, but because fighting is what they are. Fighting is all they know. Fighting is the only response to universal darkness that Sigismund's children will ever accept. The eternal crusade continues. No pity, no remorse, no fear.